Hello and welcome to a nighttime scene from Dean Park Depot. This video will focus on the depot area, including adding the floodlights, depot lights, interior lights and also shed weathering. If you have any questions, please get in touch. This video will be split into 5 parts. Part 1 will look at the floodlighting on the depot. Part 2, how to fit interior lighting to a building. Part 3 will be focusing on my factory at the depot, which is my scratch build. Part 4 will be looking at some figures and detail that I've added to the depot. And Part 5 will be looking at the weathering that I've done on my large railway laser line shed. Lots to keep you entertained. Hope you find it interesting. Please, if you've not already done so, click on the subscribe button below and the notification bell so you're notified of future uploads. And if you wish to follow me on Facebook or Instagram, look up Dean Park Station. Okay, first off with the lighting are these Express Models floodlights, and these have got 4 LEDs at each corner of the tower, and they are around about £40 to £45. I bought these about 5 years ago in anticipation for this moment, and I've finally managed to get them installed on the depot. I've waited until almost the end of the depot build to put them in because they're fragile and I didn't want to be knocking them as I did the stuff and structures at the back of the depot. They're made from brass, and the actual brass tower itself is part of the circuit, so you don't want to knock it and damage it because that is helping to illuminate the LEDs at the top. They're extremely well detailed, which I'll show you just now. I've focused in on the bottom of the floodlight here because you can see the detail and the very fine brass construction. I certainly wouldn't have the patience to do this, so £40 for one of these was value for money as far as I was concerned. You'll see also I have a concrete base on which the light actually sits. This wasn't there when I did the ballasting, so what I had to do was I had to draw a square onto the ballast, or actually drew around one of the bases, and carefully with a Stanley knife cut away the ballast and scraped it away with a chisel and then set the base in. The base is just made from a bit of 2mm MDF and sprayed and painted to look like weathered concrete. It's obviously got a hole in it for the wires to pass through. Here I've got some express model LED depot lamps. They're just an SMD LED that's been fitted to a brass constructed pole. They come already primed, but I've just given it a coat of my grey as well. Installing them is quite simple but a bit fiddly. You've got to drill a hole in the baseboard, put the lamp in, and then fit the resistor to the positive rail. If you fit the resistor before you put it in, the resistor requires a slightly bigger hole, and therefore the hole's far too big for the actual lamp, so it wobbles about and stuff. So it's a bit fidgety to get it all wired up, especially when I was underneath the baseboard doing a bit of soldering. But I've managed to get 5 of them fitted along the back. There's one at the fueling area here, one at the fueling area at the very far end, 2 near the low relief blue painted warehouse, and 1 just outside the low relief factory entrance and chimney for the boiler house, which I'll show you as we go along. Okay, this view will show you the final light in the sequence, and it gives a nice illumination to the steps, the door, and also the workings in the fuel tank area themselves. I've put a 10k resistor on all of these depot lamps. The 1k that comes with it is a bit bright, so I just stuck a 10k on there, and obviously it's given it less illumination and it's made it more realistic. Here we have express model the buffer lamps. You get a 2 lamp one, which I've used extensively at the station, and I bought these single lamped ones years ago, and again I've been waiting to use them in the depot. They're a red SMD LED on a brass column, drilled into the baseboard, solder a resistor on, done. I think they look really quite cool. When I switch the lights off in a moment, you'll see the effect of them. Well, there you go. You've got the 2 red lights illuminating the buffer stops and the depot lamp in the background, giving nice illumination for access to the fueling area. If I switch the yard lamps off, you get an effect of the red there. Again, I stuck a bigger resistor on these than I would have taken from the pack. I think again it was a 1k resistor. I've stuck, I think it's a 7k on these, just to give it a slightly less bright appearance. As this video seems to very much focus on the depot and lighting, I thought I'd show you the lighting of the boiler house. Now, the boiler house itself is a hollow structure. There's no internal detail in it apart from the brass I-beams that I've got going on there to give a bit of realism and a bit of structure. Now, my chosen technique, if you like, for putting lighting in buildings is using these SMDs, which are surface mounted diodes. Okay, basically mini LEDs, and they come in a square shape. You can paint them with acrylics, for example clear yellow or clear orange, to give that yellow tinge to the 1980s style sodium lighting. What I've done with this, and I've done it in my sheds previously, is 2 bits of 0.5mm nickel silver wire, 2 10k resistors soldered to the SMDs, and then obviously you've got the rail at the other side to complete that parallel circuit. Now, a parallel circuit should look like a ladder. Okay, so you could put numerous LEDs in there with the resistors and they'll all light to the same level. Alright, the beauty of doing a parallel circuit like this is if that one goes, this one still lights because it's still completing the circuit. So I'm going to go ahead and put some thin enamelled wires on the end of these, which will then in turn be connected to the power supply. So that's it, easy as that. What I've used in this is obviously I've got my 0.5 nickel wire, I've got my SMD LEDs, I've got my 10k resistors, I've got some lead-free solder, I've got a no-clean flux dispenser pen so you don't have to bother wiping it off and it won't corrode, and I've also got the wire cutters to cut my wires. I believe you get good ones of them at DCC Concepts, but I've had that for years. I got that from Express Models. The thin wire that is painted in a kind of shiny red, that's enamelled wire, and it's basically got an enamel paint finish on it. And you maybe saw me in the sequence there with the Stanley blade scraping the end. That's just to take the paint off to reveal the wire. So obviously when I solder it, it's going to have some obviously connectivity with the actual flow. Okay, it's the moment of truth time. I'm going to put the power on and see if these LEDs work. Hopefully they do. Just a bit of information before I do. This circuit here, that is the positive rail and that is the negative. In between the LED and the positive, I have a resistor. That is to protect the LED. Okay, without that you'll damage the LED and probably blow it. An LED is a light emitting diode, okay, so it needs protected by a resistor. If you buy a kit, for example, from Express Models, a lighting kit, they'll have an instruction leaflet in there to give you information on how to wire it up. So it's very simple. Alright, so here we go. I'm going to switch the power on here and hopefully these are going to light up. Well, thank goodness for that. That saves a bit of an embarrassment. If you want the light varied, you just vary the actual size of the resistor that you put in the circuit. So these are a 10k because I don't want them lit up too much. If you obviously want a dimmer light, you might put a 15 or a 20k resistor on. If you want more light, a 1k. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into how to wire up LEDs. It's not rocket science. It's straightforward, just takes a bit of patience and a bit of practice. Okay, that's the lighting now in the building. You can see I've grey primed the rails and the wires. This is just so it blends in with the building and adds that extra level of insulation. I've also put Tamiya clear yellow on the LEDs to give a 1980s style sodium light effect. Being a clear paint, it still allows light to shine through, but gives it a nice tinge. I've used it in my sheds, it works well. The two wires going down the right hand side there go into a braided wire, black and red, and you can see the heat shrink there to mark the connections. This is to avoid any short circuits. The lighting itself is just held in place with some black tack, the same kind of stuff you'd use for insulating a speaker chamber. This will hold, no problem, it certainly has in my sheds. So now I'm going to install this onto the layout, and the red and black wires will go to the switch unit so I can then control the lighting. We've got the boiler house back in position, it's fully lit, it's not on at the moment. I'll flick the switch and you'll see a slight difference there, but it's when I put the main light off that you'll really appreciate the yellow dim lit interior. Well, there you have it, we've got the fully lit boiler house. It's a bit brighter than it is in reality. Obviously the camera lens wants to lighten things, but it gives you a sense of the yellowy tinge that I've got through painting the surface mounted LEDs with that clear yellow from Tamiya. In a previous update I showcased this low relief North Light warehouse or factory, and I took you up to a certain stage of putting the brickwork on. I had to mothball the project for a couple of weeks. I thought it might be longer, but I've since managed to get my hands on windows, so I can now progress with completing the building and obviously fitting all the glazing. So I'm going to take you through a couple of the kind of innovations that I've used to make this look like an old worn down factory. Looking closely in here, we've got the lintel at the top of the windows and the ledge at the bottom. The lintel at the top is made from square section styrene, primed and then painted with precision paints, weather concrete, and then weather powders just to give it a more grimy, worn down look. The ledges at the bottom are made from 1.5mm MDF, which has been designed by me in laser cut, and the ledges extend around the corners at the bottom of the windows just as they would in real life. In between, I've obviously got to fit the window frame and the glazing, and that's what I've been working on in the last 2 or 3 weeks, so I can now move on to that stage. When designing the windows for my factory, I did a bit of online research, and also looked at some factories in my local area, and I found that there were multi-paned and thin-framed designs from that period. So what I did is I set about designing the window, and this one was the first one I designed. Now if I show you an example of that, the outer frame is 1.5 millimeters with the internal parts of the frame 0.8. They were looking fine. I painted them up, but I found after I'd painted them or primed and painted them that they were a wee bit too chunky. The frames were too chunky and too prominent, and it looked a bit country cottage, style of glazing. So I decided to go a wee bit fine scale. Okay, so what I did was I went back and I redesigned and got them cut, and the frame in the middle is only 0.5 and the outer frame is 1.2, I think it is. So as you can see straight away, they're less bulky and more like factories of that period. Okay, so what I did with this one is I primed it in grey this time, and then I gave it an off-white colour of Tamiya. So I used Tamiya flat white, a bit of buff, just take the white tone off it, like it faded a little bit and gone yellowy. And then once it was dry, I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but I took a sanding stick to the frame and basically rubbed off some of the white paint to reveal the grey underneath. This was to give the impression of flaking paint onto what was usually a steel framed actual window. Okay, so it's been scraped off. I also went light on the paint on the inside. You can probably see that they're more grey. Right, I wanted a dirty effect and a worn effect, so I did that sanding stick. I just basically played around with it and thought, how can I get this to look more worn? So that is the technique I've used. When setting about doing the actual glazing, I had to have it dirty. I looked at, again, photos online and local factories, and none of them had clean windows. These multi-paned factory windows were never cleaned, and sometimes you couldn't even see through them. So what I did was I cut out the glazing to match the window, and then I airbrushed on some Humbrol 32, thinned it down, kind of feathered it on, so don't go too heavy with the paint. And then I took a Humbrol 62 into that mix to give it more of a browny grey. Left it for 5 minutes, took a paper towel with a little bit of enamel thinners and just wiped. And what that did was obviously it cleaned some areas, not totally clean, but took the worst off the areas here. And it gave an accumulation of the paint at the corners, tops, and wherever I wanted it to be, basically, to replicate gathered, layered muck that's been washed down and some obviously accumulating on the bottom. These windows were washed by the rain. So I then fitted them to the back of the actual laser cut frames. Get a hold of that one. And what I've got is dirty glazing. I just attached this with some deluxe glue and glaze, which dries clear, and I'm quite happy with that. Again, they're all varied, so I've not got two the same. These can now be fitted into the factory, and then I can weather the brick a little bit, and then I can turn my attention to the roof. Okay, I've put the windows in position on the building. They're not fixed or lined up or anything, just to show you in the meantime. Straight away I can see obviously that they're a bit dirty from the outside, but if I was to light the building from the inside, you might get a better impression of the filth. I don't want to make the light too bright, but okay, you get maybe an impression of the dirt that's accumulating along the windows. Obviously the light that I put in it will not be as powerful as this torch, but I'm hoping to have some internal detail as well. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'll now glue them all in position. whilst I'm on the topic of making things look dirty, I got myself this inspection platform for putting in the depot, and it was a pre-built one from Ten Commandments. You can buy the brass etched kit to make yourself, and whilst I have a lot of patience, that might drive me to the edge. So I decided to buy the bought one. It's not cheap, but it saves me a lot of hassle. It was quite a bright red when it arrived, far too clean and bright for the depot scene. So what I did first of all is I dry brushed on some aluminium onto the step section, and you can probably see that on the camera to show that the paint's obviously been worn away. Did that on all kind of sides that would be maybe bashed or rubbed against something else. So straight away it took the newness off the red painted surface. I have to say, before I did any of this, by the way, I gave it a spray and matte varnish, just so when I did the next stage, which is adding the weathering powders, they stuck. So I did add some weathering powders, just some earth and some smoke and black from the Humbrol range, feathered it in with a broad brush, give it a good old dusting, and then I sealed it in place with some more matte varnish. And it's really taken the tone down a lot. It fits right in with the depot scene. If I turn it round, you know, it's a nice kit. I don't know how the light is picking it up, but I even dry brushed some silver on the handrails so that obviously where people were leaning, using their hands and contacting the actual frame, it would eventually wear the paint off. I've been turning my attention to doing some figures for populating the depot and some of the locos. These are from modelu, and the modelu range is extensive, and it covers pretty much every era of the railway. If you want to check it out, I'll put the website in the description below. I've got 6 figures at the moment painted up here. At the left hand side we've got a British Rail driver with his navy jacket and cap on, and I've even managed to get a small red mark on his cap to replicate the BR double arrow symbol. The chap in the orange overalls is an engineer. He's from the kind of present day scene, but I've backdated him by not putting the silver stripes all over his overall. The next chap is a shunter, and he's designed to hold on to the steps of 108, but he could quite easily just be standing in any part of the depot and, you know, inspecting something or talking to somebody. The first chap who's sitting down, cut off at the waist, he's a driver, and they fit in a variety of locos, 37s, 47s, 50s, etc. The guy in the white shirt, he's also the same, he can fit in locos. And the guy at the right hand side is a modern day engineer on his knees, maybe inspecting a bogie or the brakes on a train or something. He's again modern day, but I've backdated him by removing the silver stripes all over his overalls. Now I've used acrylics throughout, apart from the orange, which is a rail match enamel orange, and the flesh colour is from Vallejo paints, and I think it's a sunny skin tone, and I've got light flesh as well. I'll put the codes in the description below. Just mix them up to give varying tones from person to person. So I'm quite happy with that. What I've done to finish it off, again, you might not pick it up too well in the camera, but I've gone over them in a wash, especially the people in the overalls. I've gone over them in a wash to dull down the colours, make them more, accentuate the creases and stuff on their clothes. I just took a thinned down acrylic wash of browns and dark greys. It has picked out the details on their overalls, I have to say. Again, it's not too maybe obvious from this shot. So these are guys will go on the depot and some of the locos. I'll not be changing all the loco drivers that I've got, but the guy who's already in the cab there, he's going in a 47, and it's certainly better than the standard 47 driver you get from Bachmann, who quite frankly looks like he's wearing a balaclava at times. So there you go, modelu figures. I've obviously worked my way along the depot, scratch building and weathering as I've gone. It's get to the stage now where I'm going to weather the large railway laser line shed to match in with the surrounding area. However, in the early 80s, the sheds at Haymarket, for example, were fairly new, having been rebuilt. So I'm going to use those photographs as a guide to give this shed a sympathetic weathering for the period. So it's not going to be totally clapped out and rusty and manky, okay? So I'm going to give it a blending in, if you like, to suit the surrounding area. The techniques that I used were a variety of airbrushing and weathering powders. First off, I took a Humbrol 32 and weathered it down quite a lot with some thinners, and then I passed it over the roof backwards and forth like that to take the newness off the grey. I did the same at the side and the metal parts at both ends. Okay. Then what I did was I focused in on the vent areas there, gave the vents a general grime and dirty up, and then I took a bit of card and I cut almost like a letter C, and I put it over and then airbrushed down the gap, and that gave me the kind of lines, the streaky lines from the exhaust and the smuts coming from the extraction system. Okay, so that's given me that streaking effect, and I'll show you that from a different angle at some point. I've also got some general washed streaks down the side there as it comes off the roof, and it'll have gone down obviously the sides as well, and I've given the brick a general dirty, especially along the bottom and around this extraction vent here. The door as well, around about the door, is dirty. The front has been given a heavier weathering, especially around the bottom of the brickwork and above the actual entrance doors, where obviously the diesel fumes and stuff would be streaked and stained. This has been given a general dirty as well, and the top of the brickwork at the doors and inside has been an area which I've treated to a little bit of the weathering as well. The camera will lighten everything, but I can assure you it's a lot darker than perhaps the camera is picking out. Okay. Hopefully you'll see the washed grime down the roof from the extraction vents there, as well as the extraction fan there. The windows have been given a general grime, as well as the concrete ledges. This being a card part of the model, I didn't want to take a wash onto it to give it a really grimy appearance, because I didn't really want the card being able to absorb the water in any way through the edges, etc. Yes, it's all been painted, but I just didn't want to take that risk, so that's why I stuck with airbrushing and then weathering powders. Well, that's it for this update. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've been busy obviously adding lighting to the depot, as well as the shed weathering and the laurel leaf factory. In the coming month, as you'll probably see in front of you now, there's a lack of a control panel. The control panel for the points has been dismantled and removed, and I'm now in the process of upgrading to the DCC digital control panel with the LED lighting, just the same as I've got at the storage yard. So that is the rest of the month's task. Obviously the weather's starting to get a bit better outside. That means the daytime temperatures up the loft are increasing a little bit. So hopefully I can get all this done before it gets too warm. But I say, hope you've enjoyed it. Any questions, just get in touch. Cheers.